Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Off Topic Tuesdays. Today, we're going to take a look at what's going to happen in Game 3 to all the races in factions who are definitively part of the maps of Games 1 and 2. So, kick back, grab a drink, and let's get into it.
Wow.
So, there's a few ways to get all of these factions and races into the games, and we'll get into those in a second. But I guess first and foremost, we should probably take a look at all the things that we're missing. So, as much as we have the vampire counts in the game, they could actually probably be renamed to the Von Karsteins because that's what the overwhelming majority of them are. Because outside of that, we are still missing everything from the Ordo Draconis. We're still missing everything from the Lamians, still missing everything from Strigoi and everything from the Necrux. There is the vast majority of interesting factions within the vampire counts race that aren't represented. Continuing on from there, we're missing anything to do with Albion, whether that's the Truthsayers or otherwise. We have nothing to do with the Amazons, nothing to do with the Southern Realms. Midland still hasn't been put in, Halflings still haven't been put in, Dogs of War's missing, Kislev's missing, and of course the big one that everyone remembers, which is Arabi. Now, you can make the argument about how many of these actually should be factions that are added into this game, and that's a different discussion for a different day. I get that. But the point is that there is still a ton of content left that are clearly within the maps of 1 and 2 that are unaccounted for. So we'll go through them each on a faction by faction basis and take a look at sort of A, if there's even a shot that they ever will end up in a Game 3 map, but also B, how they would have to get slotted over into Game 3. So the first on this list is the region of Albion. There's actually two factions within here, the Truthsayers and the Dark Emissaries. I have absolutely zero doubt that the Dark Emissaries will appear in Game 3 in some form or another, simply because they're one of the only ways to get a generic Demons of Chaos, or not generic, undivided Demons of Chaos faction. Truthsayers are a little bit harder to justify, but there actually is still decent odds for them too, depending on how they're handled. Both of these, as much as they are from Albion, both have spread out. The Truthsayers are chasing down the Dark Emissaries who have fled since turning to Chaos. So both of them are out and about in the world. Now, slotting them into the eastern provinces would kind of be a case of Be'lakor commanded the Dark Emissaries to go east, and then, of course, the Truthsayers trying to hunt them down also had to go east. You know, bit of a finger or a hand wave, but it absolutely could be done. So I'm going to group these next two into one sort of general answer, these being Kislev and the Dogs of War. While these are both theoretically in the Total Warhammer 1 map, they are close enough to the eastern border. It's easy enough just to move that border west, toss them in there, and then Bob's your uncle. You don't even have to worry about implementation. Dogs of War in particular are just a super, super mobile force. It wouldn't really matter where you put them in the game. They could slot in anywhere. Personally, I couldn't care less whether or not the Dogs of War make it into the game, but Kislev, I think, is one that a lot of us are expecting to be turned into a faction. And again, so long as the border extends out west enough, Kislev slots right in there. No harm, no foul. All right, then. So then what about all the vampiric factions? Order Draconis, Lamia, Strigoi, and the Necrux. Um, Lamia is pretty easy to justify being in the east. They're already sort of touching on the western border as is. They're known to have gone quite a bit east. They've had dealings with Cathay. They're not an issue. The bigger issue comes from the other three: the Ordo Draconis, the Strigoi, and the Necrarchs. All three of them are pretty definitively in the old world. It's kind of hard to justify getting them over there. Apart from Ordo Draconis are known to hunt dragons. They're also known to have their own sense of honor and stuff like that. Maybe they're chasing something, maybe they were compelled to go that way. They're not too difficult. Strigoi are a bit more of a challenge. They're actually really supposed to be even more west in the old world than most of the other ones. I'm sure CEA could come up with some sort of wand waving about why they ended up over in the eastern side of the map, but to get them over there is going to be a bit of a tough one. The Necrarchs, the only sort of easy option with them is that they're typically known for chasing information. Maybe something incredible was found off in the east. The Necrarchs went to change it, or chase it, I should say. Fine, no problem there. But the vampire factions that are missing are going to be a bit more of a tough swing compared to the other ones here. So there's two sort of empire-esque factions that are missing, one being the Southern Realms, the other one being Midland. They both are actually somewhat easy to justify moving over, even though it's not really their homeland. For the Southern Realms, they're a pretty greedy, pretty economically focused faction. You could just say that, they're doing trade runs along the Silk Road. It's very commonly known. And again, it's one of those things where no one's really going to call you out for doing that. The other one, the Cult of Ulrich, is also actually pretty easy to justify. Ulrich was said to have gone eastward from his mortal form and disappeared off into the eastern horizon. I mean, if that's the person you're worshiping, it makes sense to go off in that direction yourself. But once again, it's pretty easy to justify them being over off on the eastern side of the maps. Those two are pretty safe bets. So next one on the list is a little difficult to justify moving all the way to the eastern provinces, these being the Amazons. So the Amazons actually have had units and tabletop representation and stuff. They are considered to be an actual faction possibility. The problem is that the Amazons are historically only in the old and new worlds, right? Lustria, Albion, forested regions. That's where you expect them to be. If for some reason we could justify getting Albion to move over to the eastern provinces, they could literally copy and paste the exact same answer for the Amazons, if not, frankly, put them into the Albion lineup. Um, but I'm not quite sure what plot wise you would use to justify the Amazons being that far east. Historically, they've been pretty fervent guardians of the regions that they're in. They're not really known to traverse across the known world. Continuing on the theme of very minor but technically tabletop represented races is the Halflings. The Halflings are the easiest faction on this entire list, except for perhaps the Dogs of War, to justify being over in the eastern provinces. The Halflings love food. The Ogre Kingdoms love food. Maybe they both came across an ingredient of some kind that brought them into conflict and now they're fighting over it. Easy justification. One of the halfling heroes is basically a direct copy paste of the Lord of the Rings. Maybe he's going into the mountains of Morn to try and destroy something. Again, very easy to justify. They are also unabashed thieves. Maybe they found something valuable near Cathay, or maybe they found something from a destroyed trade convoy. Again, another easy to justify raise. The halflings, I would actually say, in spite of the fact that they are known to be, part of Mootland, I would say they're the easiest ones to justify thrown over to the eastern side if CA wanted to go that route. Whether or not they do, different discussion, but halflings are not a concern to get into the new game. Which leads us into our last and easily the most difficult to justify faction, that of course being Arabi. Arabi is a super cool faction, they're very interesting, I would love to see them, but they don't really make sense in Warhammer 3. The actual physical location of Arabi is pretty far west of what we would expect the Game 3 map to be. You could maybe justify one of them being eastward by saying, that they were looking for trade or something, but to justify a whole bunch of them being that far east for trade kind of feels like a false story. The other problem is if we assume that Game Three's environment and plot and everything is going to be vaguely centered around the end times, again, Arabi doesn't really have a part to play there. They didn't really show up in the end times. Nothing really interesting happened with them. There is a little bit of a plot between them and Bretonia, but again, I can't foresee that being a major factor for Game 3. Arabi is by far the biggest one where if they don't show up by Game 2, they ain't showing up at all. All right, so just to wrap this up and kind of put a neat little bow on it, I get why CEA has been trying to trudge forward and get the games out as quickly as they can because they don't want to have too big of a divide in terms of gameplay by the time the third game comes out, and I get that. But we're seeing the results of that kind of attitude now where we're missing a lot of factions by the time we're hitting up Game 3. And while I do sincerely believe that one solution for them is just to throw them in as Mortal Empire only factions, that's going to be unrewarding for a lot of players. I'm not sure how they want to handle it, if they even want to handle it. One way I would take care of it is, like I said before in earlier videos, just open up the mod tools and let the modding community take care of it for them. Whether or not we see that remains to be seen. I hope we do, but time will tell. That's going to wrap it up for this video. For next week, we're going to take a deeper dive and take a look at Albion in depth and sort of how they could go about implementing them. And I've got some unique ideas on that. So stay tuned for that. And as always, thanks for watching.